Our second topic from chapter 11 is sexuality, and we will look at sexual activity in emerging adulthood, sexual orientation and behavior, STIs, and we may cover a little bit about forceful sexual behavior and sexual harassment, although I believe I will leave that. Actually, I will leave that section for you to read about on your own. So let's begin with sexual activity in emerging adulthood. And first of all, just a few, couple quick points about patterns of heterosexual behavior. Males have more casual sex partners than females do. Females report being more selective. This pattern um, fits the ideal environmental strategy for passing your genes on. I don't know if anyone's heard about this before, but there's an environmental theory, not environmental, sorry, evolutionary theory. This is that the best strategy for males to pass their genes on is to have as many sexual partners as possible. It's basically a shotgun approach. The reason being that males do not have to spend much time in order to produce a child. I mean, maybe a couple minutes, but it doesn't take much. They don't have to carry the developing organism for 9 months. I mean, it is a male could produce multiple children in a single day. Others will have to do the carrying and birthing and whatnot, but the male contribution is fairly limited. And so the best strategy under those circumstances, and we see this in the animal kingdom as well, is to mate as often as possible and with as many partners as possible. And so this may explain, they believe, why males think about sex more, have more casual sex partners, are less discriminating about who they have sex with, and this would all kind of fit that evolutionary shotgun approach. Once again, this is not meant to be a conscious thought where we think, oh, I want to produce more babies and I want to pass more genes on, but that it's kind of hardwired into our DNA, into our genetics. Females, on the other hand, with the minimum amount of time to produce a child, remember for males it's just a couple of minutes, and they could start the process of life. For females, I mean, it's a minimum of 9 months before the organism before the fetus is even born, and and so a woman is much more limited in the number of opportunities she has to produce children. She also has a limited time frame. Females go through menopause, typically in their 40s or 50s, and their childbearing years come to an end. Males could produce children when they're 99 years old. I mean, so like there's no limit during the lifespan for males. So males have a longer period and they can do it quickly. Females have a shorter window and it takes them, they can do one child per year basically, is basically the maximum rate. And so because there's a limited number of opportunities, it makes sense from an evolutionary perspective to try to make sure that each child survives. And in order to do that, it makes sense to have a contributing partner, a partner that's devoted, in some fashion to the upbringing and the survival of your offspring. So women are choosy about who they have sex with because they want partners that can provide resources to the upbringing of their children. And resources meaning in the caveman days, it might have been the good hunter or the one that has more furs. Now it typically means the man that has more money and can provide for the woman's offspring. And so it makes sense for the woman to be choosy. Find somebody that will help your children to survive. For males, you don't have to worry about each child because you can produce many. of them. So, anyways, because of these, the argument goes that because of these different styles, evolutionary styles of what's best to pass your genes on, this is why males have more casual sexual partners and think about sex more, and females are more choosy. Okay. Anyways, it's an interesting argument. Um, Women are still under stricter social norms and criticized for having multiple sexual partners. There's obviously a differential outlook in society as well, as far as uh, what we expect and how we view men versus women that engage in multiple sexual activities with multiple partners. Okay, approximately 60% of individuals have experienced sexual intercourse with at least one partner by the age of 18. Um, but most have by the end of emerging adulthood. So about 60% by 18, much closer to 100% by the age of 25. Casual sex is more common in emerging adulthood. Uh, and this this comes from a survey of more than 3,900 U.S. participants between 18 and 25 years old, who indicated that casual sex, um, although it's common in emerging adulthood, it actually tends to lead, or it's at least related to psychological distress. So this survey of close to 4,000 emerging adults indicated that casual sex was related to psychological distress. So even though it is more common during the time period of emerging adulthood, it's not necessarily healthy. And when we're talking about casual sex, we're talking about friends with benefits, Netflix and chill, hooking up, whatever terms you might want to give to it. Okay. Some heterosexual attitudes and behavior from a major 1994 survey. This was conducted by a researcher named Robert Michael and his colleagues. He conducted a comprehensive survey of American sexual patterns with over 3,000 randomly selected subjects between the ages of 18 and 59. So, it was inclusive of young and middle-aged adults. It was known as the Sex in America survey. It was quite a major undertaking, and we still talk about the results, even though this is from 1994. From the survey, he found that Americans fall into three major categories. About a third have sex twice a week or more, a third have sex a few times a month, and a third have it a few times a year or not at all. And so very different patterns of frequency among Americans. Okay, just reading down the list here. Married and cohabiting couples have sex more often than non-cohabiting couples. So some people think that that marriage might decrease sexual activity, but it turns out not to be the case. Most Americans do not engage in kinky sexual acts. This survey really suggested that Americans' sexual lives were more conservative than they had previously believed, and that kinky acts were somewhat rare among Americans. Adultery is the exception rather than the rule. Some people really think it's commonplace, but it turns out that it's not at all. Men think about sex far more often than women do. I already kind of talked about that earlier. And there are higher reported sexual pleasure and intimacy predicted more positive affect and less negative affect the next day. This is from a 2017 study. That's basically saying that people are happier the day after having sex. And that's not surprising to most people. Sources of sexual orientation. A national survey in 2015 reported that the percentage of 3.8% of U.S. adults reporting being gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transsexual. This is the percent that reported it. Once again, when we look at sensitive survey items such as this, we expect that there are it's going to be a lot of people that do not accurately report on their true behaviors or orientations. So we we take that 3.8% with a grain of salt. That's the percent that admits to being gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transsexual. Understanding that, of course, some people lie in these types of surveys. So we expect the number is quite a bit higher. Sexual orientation is a continuum from exclusive male-female relations to exclusive same-sex relations, and some people are somewhere in the middle, being bisexual. It's a continuum, though, and that's the important idea that has really come out over the years. That rather than thinking of, at one point we had two sexual orientations. There was heterosexuals and there was homosexuals, and that was it. That was the sexual landscape, and you were one or the other. Then we included the term bisexual based upon further research, and the third category. That third category was added, but still there was just three categories. But now we don't look at it as a certain number of categories anymore. The idea of the continuum, as you can imagine, a, a graph, at the top is like being 100% heterosexual oriented, and at the bottom, let's just say, you're 0% heterosexual oriented, meaning you're 100% same sex oriented, and you know, and and you can fall anywhere in between. So somebody might be 80% heterosexual, so they're not completely heterosexual. They're not bisexual because they're not in the middle. They're not at the 50% level. So they're somewhere in between those two categories. Or you may be in between being bisexual and lesbian or gay. And once again, there are you know um, an infinite number of different levels that you could be at. And so we don't look upon it anymore as you having to choose, that you neatly fit into one of three categories. Um, we we expect that sexual orientation is a combination of the factors listed here: genetic, hormonal, cognitive, and environmental factors. It's still a researchable question. We have some answers and some exciting lines of research, but it's a complex puzzle, is what we have found out. Um, there are twin studies that support the involvement of genes, but these same twin studies also tell us that they are not the only factor. So there is a genetic contribution, but there is also an influence of nurture as well. There is also a very what's called a very early prenatal critical period hypothesis that certain hormone levels early in prenatal development can affect the sexual orientation of a developing fetus, and uh, there is evidence to support this early prenatal critical period hypothesis. And if that's the case, and once again, just similar to the genetic evidence, it would suggest that you're born with a certain sexual orientation. But we do have some evidence on the nurture side. There are some cognitive factors that seem to help predict who is homosexual versus heterosexual. I shouldn't actually use the term homosexual anymore. We've changed it to same-sex orientation. So excuse me for that. But we also, there's also research into certain environmental factors that lend some weight to the puzzle. So anyways, the idea is that it's a real nature nurture mix. There are genetics involved, there are prenatal elements involved, and there are also some elements involved as far as the makeup of a person's brain, their cognitive abilities and behaviors, and certain environmental factors, certain nurture factors. So um, what the evidence suggests is that these four different types of factors, that they mix differently for each case, and that there is not one pattern. And this is why the research has been so hard. I mean, in some subjects and in certain research studies, I mean, There's evidence of more genetic or hormonal activity. In other studies, there are more environmental factors activities, and so there is a real mix of these factors. Anyways, whether heterosexual, gay, lesbian, or bisexual, a person cannot be talked out of his or her sexual orientation. And the factors of the genetic influence and the hormonal influence during prenatal development kind of help to explain this last point. I mean, if you're being born with a sexual orientation, if the changes that go on are prenatally or in your genes, then of course it is not going to be a conscious choice in the matter, or being talked out of the sexual orientation. You're being born a certain way, and this is what most of the evidence is supporting now. So you certainly cannot pray the gay away, so to speak. Okay. STIs. Real quick for this slide here, we know that there are sexually transmitted infections. It's what we used to call STDs. STIs is the newer term. It's more accurate rather than calling them diseases. Infections is a more accurate term. There are diseases so contracted primarily through sex. HIV is one of the biggest global concerns. 37 million individuals have it around the world. Half of all new infections are in the 15 to 24-year-old age cohort, which is that, kind of that those emerging adult years. And once again, I talked earlier about it being a risky time period in many senses. Okay. You can see the effective strategies for protecting against HIV here. I don't need to go through them. During the next few pages, you'll see a half dozen different sexually transmitted infections discussed. With gonorrhea, syphilis, chlamydia, genital herpes, AIDS, and genital warts. I will just tell you straight out that there's a test item, one test item that comes from these charts. So you should learn something about each of these STIs in order to be prepared for that item. I am not going through these. They're well presented in this chart. This chart is in your book as well. So do read up on these half dozen STIs and learn about them in order to be prepared for the test. And that will bring us to cognitive stages, which will be in the next video.